and 14. A little bit of review. We're in the part where rubber hits the road, rubber meets the road. What does rubber do? Rubber's on the road. We're rolling down the road on rubber tires. Anyway, we're going to get to a location, and this is the mountain climbing part. So this is the mountain climbing part where we're actually putting into action what we call confession. So this is part of getting the stuff in your corner store that you've had sitting on the shelves. Some of that needs to be removed. So this is the confession of actually inventoryizing it and confessing it and getting rid of it so that the things of God can be fit on your shelves. So as we were made, we have a spirit, soul, and body. So the body is our physical matter, our blood, bones, organs, all that stuff. Our soul is our mind, will, and emotions. Our mind being our intellect, our will being our thoughts, and our emotions in which we feel. So we did a great length of studies of that. And then our spirit, we did a couple sessions on that. This is where God has created us with a spirit. We're the only living things with spirits, and the point of that is to have our true identity come out of our creativity, our conscience, our connection with God, spiritual connection. All of those things are comprised of your spirit. That's where you get life from. And as we were taught, if we have a wounded or broken or crushed spirit, then somewhere in us, our strength takes over. So that could be your intellect. That could be how the world perceives you and what you drive, your status, where you live, that kind of thing. Or it could be how you react to things, out of your emotions. I know so many of us, and we've lived our lives out of our emotions. And some of us have done good things because it made us feel good. But that's not how we were designed, not to live out of our emotions. We are designed to live with a connection with God's Spirit, with our spirit. And out of that connection, our life comes from that. And so we have healing in our body and restoration in our soul and our all those things. So really what we want to do now is how we've also been made, lines and circles. We have those basic instincts. Remember, we have those thirsts and desires that God has given us. They're all good and natural. And then we've distorted them, or through our hurt and our pain, we've distorted them. And we had that story about the worms. And the worms, there's no bad worms. It's just how we go about getting them, our will, our way. And then we get our results or our consequences. And so we're designed to live in here, and then all the extremes out here would be our will. And we looked at that as the 450 horsepower versus the authority of God, which is 50 kilometers per hour. And that authority isn't there to control us and stifle us and wreck our lives, right? It's to bring us life. I don't know if you've ever seen a hockey game without a referee. It's horrible because that kid does that, and then that kid responds to that kid, and then it gets rougher and rougher and rougher. And if the refs aren't in the game, it can be a very unhappy game for the parents that are watching their babies getting, unfairly checked behind in the boards and sticks to the throat and all that stuff. But when the refs are there, the game can actually be played well, and there can be enjoyment in it, and there's fair play. So that's what that's all about, is to give us a good game, a good life. So our basic instincts were social, security, and sex. So with those three things, there's a lot more into that, but those are our worms. Those are our thirsts and our desires. And they're not wrong. It's just how we go get them. And so last week we looked at what the problem is self. Oops. And it's created these blocks. And so that's what we're going to look at. That's the rubber hitting the road, is that we're going to look at these blocks. These blocks come from over here in these extremes. Ready, set, hop. We got a football diagram going on. Here's the ball, here's the quarterback. All right. And these extremes cause these blockages. And due to us running the show, our horsepower and our social is resentment. So this is right here, resentment. And then in our security, how we provide a roof and all that stuff to be secure comes fear. And these overlap as well. When we don't solve our family issues and the things that we have in common, like at work and with employees and employers, it just builds resentment. Resentment was refueling over and over, and it's like just holding on to it and holding on to poison. And then we looked at fear out of here. So that was, and then now we're going to look at the block of our sex conduct. And so when we look at these inventories, I really, like, for the time being, because you've probably never done this before, for the time being, go all the way down and maybe meet with your pay setter once you get, maybe you have 10 names. They just come to you like this, resentment. I re-feel this person's actions, this. You might be able to get 10. You might be sitting there going like, I got like 1,000. Like, who's got the photocopier money? And so just go name them down and then keep going down the lanes. And this is just a way that you don't get stuck right here or right here. So while we're rookies, we just go all the way down, check in with your pay setter. We got the next couple of weeks to do this. As you grow in this, as you gain a resentment, then you go across, right? Then you can see where you, it's easier to deal with that way and you don't get stuck. So for the time being, just go down, maybe check in with your pay setter once you get a column completed, and then keep going. Especially at the end of resentment, there is the part where do I take responsibility? What's my part to play? And some of you, I think we discussed this a little bit, but some of you have had some serious things to have righteous resentments about. Resentments, as we looked, resentments that reside in our heart, we don't have the capacity and the capability to hold on to them because they become poisonous to us. They affect us. They change our perception. It's like drinking poison. We just don't have the ability to hold on to them, and we do. And so I know that there are people here that are listening to this going, well, there's no way that I can just let go of that because that happened and that happened and that happened and all these things. And my parents didn't look after me and there's abuse or whatever it is. What's your part? You have no part to play in the action that gave you the resentment. There's a lot of us that have resentments that we didn't even know the situation, let alone remember what we had a part in. And so my part, you all have a part in a resentment. And the part is, do you want to let it go? My part is I've held on to it. I don't want to. That's my part. It's so I can't forgive. That's an honest part. I don't want to forgive. I'm not ready to forgive. I'm not willing. I'm right? So maybe look at that and maybe work with your pace setter with that, because some of it is very heavy and some of it you've had since childhood. And so that can just as simply be your part, your role, is that I've held on to it. And rightfully so. So it doesn't excuse the situation, it doesn't excuse the behavior that happened to you, but do you want to keep poisoning yourself? If you look at black mold, most of the times you don't know it's there. And imagine living in a room with black mold and somebody tells you there's black mold. You go to the doctor and they do some tests and they find the spores and they said, like, you're living with black mold. And then you go searching, there's black mold. And you're like, oh, it's not killing me. Until it does. And so that's what resentment is. You're holding on to it. And that's your part. That's all it is. And that's how simple it can be, is we do have a role because you're just holding on to it. And I'm not saying you didn't have a choice. You don't. Like, most of us have these resentments and deep rooted, and it's not our fault because we were in this situation or the abandonment or whatever it was. So my fault can be, my part can be, I've held on to it. I haven't been forgiving. I'm unable to. All right. So we're going to continue, and we're going to look at these blocks right here: sex and harms to others, and shame. So we got a lot to cover. And so, yay, I got to talk about sex. You know, like, I'm a pro. I've had 2 children. So I know what I'm talking about. I know what... Wow. Peanut gallery, eh? By accident. All right. Where was I? Wasn't in my notes. Threw me right off. I'm going to have a drink. Obviously, this is a topic that's hard to talk about. I've been teaching this type of thing in a therapeutic environment at a rehabilitation addiction treatment center with dudes. With dudes, we talk about sex, everybody looks down. I think guys inherently know that we're animals. Like, we totally get it. And we don't really want to talk to women about our issues, but when we're men, we can bring stuff up, and it's still hard to talk to. My experience of bringing these concepts out to a wider variety of people, including females, was horrific for me. Because the first time I did this was with our core church planting team, as we went through LifeLab and church planting, and my mother was in it. So my beautiful mother is an encourager, a cheerleader. Look at my son go. For 13 classes, she was just sat there on the edge of her seat. Listen to my son teaching. Yeah, praise the Lord. Amen. And then, you know, there was just cheering and adoration in the front row. Oh. When we got to session 14, I told her that we were doing this and I felt uncomfortable, and she said, I won't be there. That's no big deal. I said, no, I'm a mature, healthy adult. No, please be there. Let's do this. I got to do it sometime. And so I get teaching, and all of a sudden, Nana has a lot to say, and she's putting up her hand, and she's participating in class, and it becomes my nightmare. You know? Mom, we're talking about masturbation. Oh, she had so much to say about that. She was willing to participate. We all looked at her going, why? Why is this happening? She goes, well, you know, I worked at the mental hospital. I worked in the psych ward. Yeah, that's what we all said. We're like, what goes on in the psych ward to make this anyway. So is talking about sex super comfortable for me? Not at all. I'm going to talk about it in this context of building blocks to God, because we do have 50 kilometers an hour, just like finances. Just like security, I really believe that you have to figure out what the speed limit is. We have people, we have wisdom, but overall we have a directional book called the Bible that tells us a lot of these things. Of course, we can talk to each other and go, is this what I should be doing with my money? Or is this how I should be, should I get married, or should we live together? Or what's 50 kilometers an hour? And so when we don't live 50 kilometers an hour, you're not free from it. You're not exempt from it. When you hold on to resentment, you're not exempt from the result of it, which which when we don't practice forgiveness, when we're gossiping, and in our social lives we got headbutts, right? And you're not exempt. It doesn't matter who you are. You're not exempt from resentment. Because you refeel these situations, and that person's talking about me, so I'm going to talk about them. And I'm going to tell this lie. And then when we're fighting for our own security, and I'm building my kingdom, and I'm going and getting my education and my house and my cars, I'm not exempt. It doesn't matter who I am. I'm not exempt from building fears. Because I'm doing it all on myself, and it's reliant. My family is now reliant on me. And how much money I bring in, and then it just takes you into places and things that cause fear. And when you're providing everything for yourself and trying to maintain a social status and a spot and you're in the race, there's always somebody with a bigger boat and a shinier car and a better looking wife with more plastic in her, right? And it causes fear. It doesn't matter who you are. You're not exempt from it. And so it's the same way when we do sex. You're not exempt for the consequence or the result of doing it your way. And so I don't want to pull out the letter of the law, same as money. I don't want to pull it out, go, this is what you have to do with your money. And I have a couple friends with an immense amount of wealth. And you're like, can you be a Christian and have all those things? Am I the judge? No. But it's easy to do when somebody's buying this and that, and you're kind of like, huh. So the same time here, you're not exempt from shame. So if in your moral standard you believe that you can do this, but it's 50 kilometers an hour, and you're doing it over here in extremes, then you're going to have the consequence of guilt. It doesn't matter who you are. And so there's a lot of things in between all this and whatever the 50 kilometer an hour mark looks like, you're going to have to figure out through your own experience. This is part of writing it down, where the guilt and the shame and the resentment and the harms came from. And you're supposed, you can look at that and go, huh. Living that way with being married and having a girlfriend, or never being married and having 14 girlfriends, or, picking up girls at the bar, like that caused shame because I'll never be good enough, or I'm only worth whatever. And so it doesn't matter your moral compass, you're actually going to identify things that go, huh, I was living out of that. Okay, I'm going to start living this way because I don't want that anymore. I don't want to carry that. I want to let it go. Cool? There's a lot of stuff in here that you can do on your own reading. The one thing that I'm going to look at is one of my views on a specific genre of sex, instinct. And the reason that I feel that I have some capability in this, obviously working with men for the last decade, things come up. So I started my service to God. I got sober and figured out that I had to stay sober by serving other people and passing on the message. And I got working at a care home for mentally ill guys. And there were three guys in particular that would come to me probably weekly and just come into the office and want to talk to me and just sit there like they were loaded with guilt and shame. And you're like, what did they do? Like when I first started working at this home, I remember the first time the one guy, I thought he was suicidal. I was ready to call the ambulance. I wasn't. And he goes, I sinned last night. Like, what happened? Like, oh my goodness, I masturbated. I'm like, oh, huh. All right. And I'm coming from driving a tractor trailer world. I'm coming from elevator union world. And I got a big man sitting next to me crying because he masturbated last night. And the guilt and the shame. And he's not good enough. He's never going to go to heaven. And I'm like, how do I be of service to this man? How do I do this? Like, I want to come, because I have no clue what to say. I just say, yeah, I want to hug you. It's okay. Here's a pill. What is my response to that? And so over the next weeks and months, this kept happening, and the same couple guys would just come in, and they're so full of shame, and that I'm not going to heaven. No one could ever love me because what I did last night, like murdered somebody. No, and then as soon as I see them, I know now what. So I really researched this. I really wanted to investigate because I wanted to be able to give a answer, and I don't think that sex is demeaning and just guilt. Like, I don't think that it's bad. And I'm seeing these. How do I encourage somebody that is just in a hole of guilt and shame and condemnation? And so that's what the block is. When we do it our way in our extremes, that's where you get guilt and shame from. So this is kind of what I've studied and self-reflected and did some research about. Is masturbation right or wrong? And so, let's roll the tape. I'm glad there's so many women in front of me. I'm just going to take a sip of water. In my research, I have found out that this is not a guy problem, whether it's a problem or not. It's not a guy thing. It's a human thing. That was shocking to me. I didn't know. Anyway, let's just stay on the notes. It'll be easier that way. It's the kind of thing, at the job site. At the job site, I would hear it all the time. Dude, I got a 60-ouncer and a pack of weed. Oh my goodness, what a party. Right? You hear that all the time. Like, high five, oh yeah. But I've never heard the guy come in like, oh man, Friday night, Saturday, all day, Sunday afternoon, I crushed like 18 hours of porno. Like, you don't hear that. Right? And there's guys that use porn like I use drugs and alcohol. And it changes your brainwaves. So it's definitely one that builds the shame. I believe that in habitual masturbation, there's a couple things that I would bring up. I'm not condemning. I'm not saying that it is or it isn't, but this is what I believe the harm in it is. Number one, it's self-comfort. God has designed us in a specific way. And God is my comforter. If I'm connected spirit to God, He gives me His comfort. His rod and His staff comfort me. And so I can seek comfort in different ways. And masturbation is one of them. And I know people that you can't even get to sleep without doing that. And they're doing it 2 or 3 or 5 times a day because they need their comfort. So it's I'm going to talk more on the men part of this, just because that's more of my experience. It can be compulsive and obsessive. It can be something that people participate in a few or half a dozen times a day or more. So it's something that can be controlling to you. The other thing is that it gets in the way of intimacy with people and with God. the other thing that I've seen, especially in men, and this is the undertone of a man, the heart of behind every man is, do I have what it takes? Do I got what it takes? Am I a real man? Do I have what it takes? And in a woman, on the foundation of a woman's heart is, am I worth pursuing? Am I beautiful? I believe that masturbation as a man takes away a few things. Number one, it takes away leadership. It makes it so that a man sits in the back row and puts his head down. Because he doesn't really want to answer anything because he knows what he's doing. When he's consuming himself and self-comfort and consuming video stuff and all those things that go with it, you're actually consuming a product, especially when it comes to porn. You're consuming a product, and you're actually enabling that product to be distributed. And the other thing it does, so number one, it takes away leadership, and then it takes the ability away as a leader to fight for a relationship. And we all have our needs. And when I'm getting my need met sexually, I'm not going to fight for her heart. Because women connect a little bit differently. Men are more proximity, right? She gets out of the shower, right? I get out of the shower. You're getting the floor wet. Stop it. It's like, what are you talking about? Right? I see in the mirror. Atlas is in the mirror. She's like, get some pants on. Stop it. You're stupid. Right? And she connects emotionally. For the most part. I'm using a broad brush. But for the most part, a woman connects emotionally and a man connects physically. And so we can use this against each other a little bit. When I am taking care of my physical need, I don't need to connect with you emotionally. You're scary. When you're mad, you come at me. Like, no dude comes at another dude when we're mad. That means you're going to fight. Like, women come, like, no, love me, please. Tell me I'm beautiful. That's what she's really doing, but she's really saying, fight for me, love me, meet me emotionally, right? But I don't have a physical need, so why would I do that? That sounds like a lot of work and a lot of effort to connect with you emotionally, and what do I get out of it? And I've learned this from sex doctors and people that have researched this. And the tip to guys that I've heard is saying little things like, number one, you satisfy me. The first time I said that to my wife, I laughed out loud. I actually laughed. Like, oh, you satisfy me. Uh-oh, I'm having camera problems. And the other thing is I remember this one doctor saying that you need to connect with her, connect and look at her. Right? I don't need to look at your face to talk to you. For some odd reason, I can drive and I can have a conversation without looking. For some odd reason, my wife has to look at me. Like, you're driving, can you not look at me, please? And so you connect with your eyes. And I know that I can connect with my wife in bed by looking at her. And we just sit there and look at each other. I'm like, this does nothing for me. And you see her being filled. I don't know what she's being filled with. Because my eyes aren't that good looking. I don't know what's happening right now, but there's oxygen being pushed into her. There's something that's happening. Thank you for connecting with me. Cool. Doctor said, don't have sex right then. Like, that's hard. She's just happy and connected. Don't do it. And I've learned the hard way. It's more effective when I fight for her heart and try to connect with her emotionally because she responds physically. And so if I am taking care of my physical need, believe me, fighting for your heart and your emotional need is draining. Like if I'm already getting what I need. Do you see what I mean? Like if I'm taking care of myself physically and sexually, I don't need to fight for your heart. So that is one side of it. And I'm just telling you things that I've learned. That why it can be a hazard. The other thing that porn does would be, I'm talking about masturbation porn. So porn would actually rewire your brain just as chemicals are released. That is at the point of ejaculation, that is the highest chemical experience that a human can have. And some of us have done some hardcore drugs, and we've been high for 5 to, I don't know, some people 10 days. Like that's impressive. Imagine having an orgasm for 10 days. I don't, you wouldn't want that. It wouldn't be normal. You wouldn't be able to deal with life. It's a very powerful thing that happens, and the brain receptors. And so what happens, and how God has made it so that we can go 50%, right? And I know that the extremes distort and our moral compass and our needs to be comforted and loved and all those things we're grabbing onto. If I connect with you physically, you're going to connect with me emotionally. Does that always work? No, and it leaves you empty and guilt-ridden and shameful because you've done it again and he left. What happens is, and how he's created you to function at 50 kilometers an hour, is he's actually at the point of ejaculation for a man. I'm not sure if this is true for a woman, but for a man, there's actually a snapshot that's taken. And so that snapshot is of whatever's in front of him. And so if it's a video screen, then you're snapshotting that perfect image that isn't real. But that image is what your mind goes for. And that's why your wife is fat. That's why, because in your mind, this is the image that you've been looking at. And so God has made it so that a man can be faithful. Because if you are with the same partner and you have your eyes, that's the snapshot that you get. And it might take a year or two to become clean and not have the other pictures in your head. But God has made us and designed us to be able to drive 50 kilometers an hour for our own good. And so I have personal experience with that, and I know that to be true. And this isn't coming out of, this is coming from a doctor called Dr. Weiss. He's a sex doctor. Amazing stuff. And so it's interesting how we have been designed in a way to actually operate within the parameters, to bring life to us and not shame and guilt. Do I have what it takes? Masturbation says, no, you don't. Because you don't need her. You don't have to pursue her. And there's a whole generation behind us that's 20 years old, that's 15 years old, that's 25 years old, that have had a high-definition porn machine at their disposal since they were 6 or 7 years old. And they don't need a woman, nor want one. And I see a trend that's happening in a younger generation. And they're scared of women. They're scared of relationship. And why would they need it? Whew! Tough, eh? Porn and masturbation says, I don't need to fight for her heart. It's too much work. It's a lot of work. So we got our sex inventory that we're going to do, and just go down the list again. And maybe you're somebody that's dealt with this a lot. Maybe you're somebody that, maybe you've had no partners. Maybe you're somebody that your video machine or your cell phone has been your partner. And so write that down, because there's guilt and shame around that as well. And we just want to like get rid of the blocks. If you were somebody that's worked a ton on this and gone through some inner healing or gone through the 12 steps or whatever, and you've actually written down, 2 names or 100 names, you might not want to write those names down again. You might want to write the concept of what the behavior was. And because I don't necessarily want you to rehash all the names and go like, oh. But this was the concept. Bar girls. 3 a.m. girls. Girls that lived at home with their moms. The girls' moms. Whatever. Sorry. That wasn't in my notes. I apologize. So write the categories down if that would be, if you've already gone through some of this stuff. I know it's hard, and it's hard because it's defined us a lot because of that, the guilt and shame. Go down what you did, what's the exact nature of your wrong, and all that. Who did I harm? That kind of thing. All right, so that's the sex inventory. We're getting through these really well. We're climbing up the mountain. So we did resentment, fear, and sex. So these are the blocks that are blocking us from God's Spirit, God's love, God's peace. I want to trade resentment, no matter how I got it, the poison that I'm carrying around, the black mold that is killing me whether I think it is or not. Right? I sprayed mildew on it, but it's behind the drywall. I have to destroy it. I have to change the drywall. Take out the insulation. And so this is what we're doing, is we're getting rid of it. And it might be a concept that you're really struggling with and going, I can't do this. Like, there's no way, there's too much. I think that's the best opportunity. I think the worst one is I got nothing. I have no, I've dealt with all this. Right? At least if you're sitting here like rocking and sucking your thumb, I think that's a good thing. Because that means you have so much stuff to get out. And as much stuff as you get to get out, you get in return peace and joy and love. All those things. So don't think of it as an overwhelming, don't get stuck here either. This is something that we want to work through in the next couple of weeks. Not years, And then on a side note, if this is too much for you, then let your pace setter know. And there's no harm in coming back for another round. There's no harm in keep at it. Just don't get stuck here and move on and say, I can't deal with this. Because I've seen more people stuck here and leave or just say, I got it. I'm good. I've been sober 3 months. And then a month goes by, 3 months go by, a year goes by, 2 years go by. And we're not exempt from it because the black dots in the garbage pile, I will need to be relieved from it somehow. And we always start innocently, and then all of a sudden I'm drinking again. And then when I get enough pain and enough hurt and anxiety, I go back and go, okay, let's do this again. And as long as you're alive, you still have opportunities to do it again. Lots of us shouldn't be here. I know it shouldn't. All right, so we're going to do another one. This is called shame. We have a shame inventory. So we have our sex inventory, but then the shame inventory is a little bit different. It's more about your identity. So guilt says, I've done something wrong. I've been bad. Right? Shame says, I am something wrong. I am bad. It's your identity. It's what you believe. One of the things now that shame used to really come out of a moral standard. And today, shame really comes about of inclusion and exclusion. That's our shame culture now, is how many likes and how many shares and how inclusive can I be? You look at the biggest thing now that's blowing my mind is that we actually purchase and go online when we do shopping or Airbnb or Uber, any of those things. What do you read? Do you read about how great Uber is? No, you see your driver. How many stars? How many trips? How about this Airbnb? How about the product that you're looking at? Oh, it's got like 400 reviews. This one has 2. I'm not even going to read those. So you start reading the 200 reviews. You start reading some of the reviews, and there's a few negatives, and you're like, I'll try it. And it's all about reviews. How many likes? How many shares? And we do that with ourselves in our culture. You're excluded. Shame says, I can't. I'm no good. I won't be able to. I can't help myself. I don't fit in. I'm always left out. I'm unacceptable. And the voice of shame says, you will always be. You will never. You can't do that. And I come in agreement, and that's how I have a false identity. I'm my biggest critique. You do who you think you are. Right? When I think, it turns into action. So shame is gender specific. So when you look at women and men in shame, to conform to our culture as a woman is, you got to do the laundry, you got to wash behind the kids' ears, you got to make the lunches, work 9 to 5, come home, cook dinner in a really cute, sexy dress, and make sure they don't see me sweat. Right? That's the standard of a woman today. How do I conform to a cultural norm as a woman? Okay? Did you have a question? No. Oh, okay. How do I conform to the cultural norm as a woman? I be nice. You have to be nice. You have to be thin, modest. And for the most part, my money is spent on my appearance. And that's how cultural norm I have to fit in as a woman. And I'm using a broad brush. For men, don't be perceived as weak. The fitting into the cultural norm as a man, emotional control. Don't let them see you cry. Work first. Primary function for my life is to work. Pursuit of status, and to be tough. And so that's how I fit into the cultural norm of our society as a man and a woman. And so shame says who you are, or that you can't be, or that you're not good enough at. And so I've been listening to this psychologist, Brene Brown, and she talks about shame as an epidemic. And she's got a TED Talk. It's amazing. Watch it. She has lots of stuff. And she was doing studies on shame. And she says that there are 3 things needed for shame to grow. And that's secrecy, judgment, and silence. And she says that the counter is connection. The counter of shame is connection and empathy. Empathy says, me too. Empathy says, I've been there. Empathy says you're not alone. And that overcomes shame. And she says in her study that she has a couple tips on overcoming shame. She says, talk to yourself like you talk to someone you love. Would you ever say, oh my goodness, I'm so stupid? Like, I can't believe I did that. I'm a retard. Ugh. Like, would you talk to yourself and get away with it if they were someone else? Would you be able to talk to your boss like you talk to you? Talk to yourself like you talk to someone you love. Reach out to someone you trust and tell your story. Secrets intensify shame. And so that's one of the things that we do at our monthly shows called Ashes to Rubies. We share our stories. And they might not be complete stories. They might be train wrecks of stories. And I think we can share our story and not have it figured out at all. But say I want to have it figured out, and this is what's happened to me. And this is why I do what I do. And it breaks shame. It breaks those false identities. And it's called vulnerability. So if you have some time tonight or whatever, look up Brené Brown. She's a psychologist, talks about vulnerability. She has a TED Talk and a book. So that's the shame inventory. We look at what lies I believed, what names I've been called, how did I react, and then I want to put truth in there. Wherever there's a lie, whatever the false identity is, I want to add the truth into it. Are you really stupid? Are you really no good? Are you really unlovable? Good stuff. And then overall, and you might not have some of these here, and I know that, I look at every parent, and for the most part, when they have children, they're good parents and good people, and they try their best. Like, no one had kids and go, oh, I'm going to mess this one up so bad. I'm going to turn them inside out and twist them up all over the place. I'm going to create a monster. Wow. Most parents don't do that. Even, like, dysfunctional parents. I might have been in that category. I was a little dysfunctional. But I don't think most parents try to be bad. When I look at the resentments and the fears, maybe you're someone that doesn't really have very many of those or can't even identify them. But when we look at harms, and I've had this multiple times where, there wasn't much here or much there at all. Maybe one thing or five. But then when it came to harms, it was like, ugh, what's the point of doing this? Like, I got hand cramps just thinking about all the people I've hurt. You're not hurting people because you're super well-balanced and healthy. And as a parent that you're not there full of resentments, parenting, and fear, but when you've harmed people and you see the outcome of their lives as children and they're reacting, there's reasons, right? There's reasons of things that you've believed and resentments that you've been held onto, and that's why your parenting was super strict or super loose or overprotective or non-existent, right? And it's not like we've tried to do it, but because of our resentments and because of our fears, we've hurt those around us. So you might not see a lot here until you get to harms. And I've had this happen multiple times where it's like, oh my goodness. Like, let's get the photocopier out. What's the budget? Right? And you can list off 1,000 people that 1,000 people that you've harmed. And so here's some words that will help you. Harms done to other. Due to our pain, we've hurt those around us. And keep this inventory because we're going to use it near the end of the mountain climb. So anything from being bitter to avoidant to frightened to being greedy to being jealous, lazy, overspending, dominant, suspicious, all those things. Write the list of how you've harmed others. And so all the lists are there. I would encourage you to work with your pace setter. Maybe call a few times a week if you have to, or after every row that you've got done. Maybe check in and just say, hey, I've finished this row. Can I read you off the names? Or, hey, I can't find any names. I'm just making up names now. Like just to put 3 names on a list. My encouragement is work on this on a daily basis. And start at the resentments, do the fears, sex, guilt and shame, and then harms. And I know it's a lot of work, but climbing up a mountain, like you're just going to climb the mountain. Like don't make a 2-year journey out of it. Like let's climb up. Let's get up there. Let's get this stuff out. Be willing at least. That's the other thing I encourage you to be willing to do this. Right? That's all you really need is the willingness to put pen to paper, to climb up the mountain. And I promise you, this stuff is blocking peace and joy and contentment and all those things that are positive. So to whatever level you put in is what you're going to get out. I think the vision is for everybody to have a clean inventory storeroom. There might be a couple shelves of stuff that you're like, okay, let's get rid of this. There might be some walls with mold and with all that black mold, and you gotta, hey, I'm gonna take this stuff out, rip it out, and rebuild. There's nothing wrong with that. But as a human in our great design, we're not exempt from this. All right.